My name is John Spriggins. I am a native of South Dallas and director of the South Dallas Cultural Center in Dallas, Texas. I remember growing up in the Frazier Court Housing Project, and the time that I spent there as a kid, I think, was a lot of fun. There were really good memories of growing up there, particularly in grade school. At least through the 6th grade, I never really looked at where we lived as being less than, that it was just where I lived and my family was there. And I really enjoyed us all being together.
My name is Deborah Page. I'm John's mother. I'm a former resident of South Dallas. I came here in 1961 and lived in the community for 50 years or more. I remember first moving to Frazier Courts. I was afraid, but I made a lot of good friends. Even though it was a housing project, we still had fun. Yeah, it was a good thing. I felt safe because people they looked out for you, especially for the kids. Police officers look out for the kids. I've seen police officers pick up kids and take them down to Good Luck and get them hamburgers because they know they were hungry.
Granny, tell me about the South Dallas that you remember when you and your family lived here.
Oh, that was such a wonderful time in our lives. When I married my husband, who lived on Southland, we lived in the home that my husband grew up in, and my 3 daughters, Cynthia, Retta, and Anita, all went to Lincoln High School. And they loved it. There were a lot of businesses up and down the street. And as my husband told me, they were even more prosperous before I got a chance to experience it. When we moved in there in 1967 or so, there were doctors and lawyers, a pharmacy, all kind of eateries. You could walk to where you want to go.
Oh, I can be when I trek to school each day on their street to Lincoln High School. And the classmate I recall from that, with those are still around. We've had joyous times and reminiscing about the good old days.
I remember living in this community at Fitzhugh in Pennsylvania. That's where my paternal grandmother lived, on the corner. It was right across from the State Fair Park. And it was just a wonderful time. It was a segregated community, but at the same time, it just had a warm feeling. Right in front of our house was the roller coaster, which is not there anymore. But we could see the fireworks from the front porch, and it was just a lively neighborhood.
This was before my time. There was a club my dad used to come to in South Dallas. When he first moved here from St. Louis, he came to Dallas and lived up North Dallas. So he didn't really try to move to South Dallas, but he knew that's where he would come to party.
In the mid-1950s, he had a young man named Ray Charles Robinson who lived on Eugene Street in Dallas. And he organized his band here.
There was a club on Carroll Street. It was called MK's. And my father was born at 909 Carroll, which is just a couple of houses down from where MK's was. MK was a small juke joint, and of course it had a jukebox, and my aunt worked there as a waitress, and sometimes she just participated there as a customer. She worked hard, and she made good money. She had other work that she did, and everybody had 2 or 3 jobs because life was hard, and they did what they had to do in many ways that they could. Even my father, he had 5 or 6 jobs. And he was a gambling man, played pool, played cards. We think about this is an oppressed time, and that was where they could go to find some happiness, some relief from the stress of Jim Crow laws.
My name is Tamika Muhammad. I'm a former resident of South Dallas. I have relatives who lives here, and my husband works in the community. I think my most fondest memories at this point are of coming back to South Dallas and visiting my dad here. Just really enjoyed those moments of sitting on his porch. And it didn't feel like the South Dallas that people not from here talk about, or those that are too scared to come into the community. I never felt that. I just saw us being us. And as long as you didn't act like you were afraid, nobody treated you any kind of way. It was, it's community.
My family has been in Dallas since 1847, the spring of 1847. And we have been in America, tracing both families, the white family and the black family. When you talk about South Dallas, some people consider anything south of downtown as South Dallas, but South Dallas now is the land between downtown Dallas and Trinity. So, we weren't a part of the new South Dallas, but we were part of southern Dallas.
It's now officially known as South Dallas Fair Park, as opposed to Southern Dallas, which a lot of people coming in now will refer to Oak Cliff as South Dallas, which rubs us all native people the wrong way. Right. But it's South Dallas Fair Park officially now, as opposed to Southern Dallas, which incorporates everything south of downtown.
At the turn of the century, the Jewish ruling class started to develop what we know now as South Dallas. This would have been Park Road, South Boulevard, Grand Avenue. That was all the development of the rich Jewish family who had been in Dallas since the arrival of the train in 1872. The Houston, Texas and Central came in July of 1872. It went north and south. And then in 1873 was the arrival of the Texas and Pacific. It went east and west. That was starting to be the development of what we know now as South Dallas.
I remember Martin Luther King used to be Forest Avenue. And you would go down Forest Avenue, it was like going down a street in Highland Park. All of the grass was immaculately green, beautiful, manicured bushes, shrubs, trees. There were two-story homes on each side. And that was before they demolished the houses and put the businesses there and the other things all the way up to the Forest Theater. But it was a beautiful street. To me, that's one thing that was lost. And the most important thing is that when the Jews started moving out, they sold those homes to Black people in the 50s. It was a housing shortage. This was after World War II. This community was expanding and there was just a housing shortage. And so what they did is, if on Martin Luther King, they would divide those houses into one family upstairs and one downstairs, and some of them are divided into fourplexes. The Jews were moving out because they had run Central Freeway right beside their synagogue, which is further down on Martin Luther King. So Jews have a tradition that they must walk to church. And so that freeway ran and that pushed them out. And I believe had not the Jews sold their property, rented their property to Blacks, had they not started selling out, I don't think this would have ever been a Black neighborhood. And once the Jews started moving out and renting them to Black people, that's when the bombing started in the 50s.
When the men started to come home again for World War II, they were demanding better housing. They didn't want to move back into them little shotgun houses that had no running water, no electric, none of the convenience. They were still inside Dallas, but they were moving across the street, moving around the corner. the word got out that a house was up for sale and that a Negro was buying it, they would bomb the house. They had a series of bombings and nobody in the police force could ever find these guys. They were all members of the Klan and White Citizens Council. And I think eventually they found 3 guys, but from newspaper stories, nothing really ever happened to them.
I'm a lifetime member of Mount Horeb, Horeb Baptist Church. It was a leading faith group in that South Dallas, Bonton, Lincoln Manor area, major church in the area. Everybody went there. It was right off of Bear and Hooper, H-P-E-R. When the city, the state, the highway department decided they were going to bring, 175 through my old neighborhood. Oh my gosh. The community just went into hysterics because it went right through where this major church, my church, Mount Horeb, was. But we ultimately had to move. Our grandparents, my mother's parents, there on the street, right up the street from what is now H.S. Thompson Elementary. And it was at Bethlehem and Bear, B-E-X-A-R. It's still there. It just was recently renovated. Bethlehem, B-E-T-H-U-R-U-M, and Bear, B-E-X-A-R. Don't ask me where that pronunciation came from. Grandparents' deserted house is still there. It was at the intersection of Bethlehem Avenue and Welch, W-E-L-C-H. And I get a million calls from West Coast people coming to Dallas wanting to buy it. And my automatic answer is, no, not interested. Thank you for calling. But the house, deserted house, is still there. And I clearly remember being in bed at night and that train would at night. But it didn't bother me. It was just a familiar sound of being asleep at night. So I'd go, turn on over. These people would come up the street, trucks. One would be selling ice that you would put in what was called an ice box. And we didn't remember his line particularly, but the man who sold brooms. And this sound has stuck with me for years and years. Broom man, whoop, broom man would be way up the street, but he would advertise himself. Broom man, whoop, broom man.
My name is King Shakur. I remember first school I went to was Phyllis Wheatley, which is closed now. And that's in Wheatley Place. I graduated from Lincoln in '97. Remember, really, I think the biggest traditions that we grew up with inside Dallas is seeing people, especially in the yard, like barbecue and playing dominoes and cars in the front yard.
For me, the sound of South Dallas would be laughter, just jolly laughter and banter. People slapping dominoes down on the table, hard, big six, and you better not be marking the board. And so the sound of South Dallas was just laughing, maybe a little bit of cussing, just talking stuff.
And I definitely remember growing up, they would always burn old clothes to keep the mosquitoes away. That was always pretty festive on our street, down the street, real busy street. And so a lot of houses ended up getting torn down or either burned down or ran down over time. The street was filled with kids, a lot of kids. A lot of families at the time up and down Atlantic Street, real active. I knew everybody, so people knew you, so you can walk anywhere.
The first black folks to move in the South Dallas moved at Nanta Street, probably 1910, 1911. Started moving on Atlanta Street because, again, these pockets had black folk who could walk. They could walk, clean, cook, and take care of the white family who lived in that area. And the ones who lived in South Dallas, a lot of them lived in what they call servant quarters. Those were the little houses behind the big house where the black women worked or lived because they took care of the house and the family, and they were allowed a lot of times to come home on weekend. And they paid the black women on Thursday. It was called Maid's Night Out, where they would pay them on Thursday, and the husbands, the boyfriends, the families could come visit them. We call them garage apartments now, but they were servants' quarters. And they pay them on Thursdays because they said if they paid them on Friday, they wouldn't come back to work until Monday. So they paid them on Thursday and they'd be broke Saturday, and they'd be there to cook Sunday dinner.
Really, my fondest memories of South Dallas growing up was spending time with my aunt on Hatcher Street and going to the football games, basketball games, and also first falling in love with the marching band at Madison High School. I started playing saxophone in elementary, actually, and all the way through high school, and that's where I fell in love with it, watching the James Madison marching band.
South Dallas was really a very diverse neighborhood, because Dallas has pockets of black folk, not cities like Chicago or Harlem, where you just have a massive group of people who, one way or another, migrated into this central neighborhood. But Dallas had these pockets of black folk. For instance, I had a little neighborhood called Queen City, and Queen City is off of Malcolm X in Atlanta. And Queen City, and Whitney Place. Whitney Place was a part of the black community, again, that served the greater white community. You had Frazier Court in the 30s, and Turner Courts came later in the 50s. That's when they had, the United States started to build projects for people who were coming to the city. And the men were coming home from the war. Bunton you had two communities down there. You had Bunton and you had Lincoln Manor. And that's when people started, when South Dallas started to expand, and the developers went in the 30s and started to develop Bunton and Lincoln Manor.
To officially enter Bonton, you would, if anybody knows Dallas, what was Hatcher Street is now Elsie Fay Hagen. And if you were on Hatcher Street / Elsie Fay Hagen, you would turn right and go south on Bear Street, that Bexar Street. And then once you got to what was the railroad track, if you went across the railroad track and kind of went down a little slope, you officially were in Bonton. My grandparents' house where I grew up was the second street before you got to the railroad track. Lincoln Manor is still, the community is still called Lincoln Manor after Abraham Lincoln. And it was, whoever named it Lincoln Manor, because of African Americans who populated that area. I don't even know if they still call it Blue Lake, but it was an outlet of the Trinity River. And it was in Bonton is low. It was at Bonton. And William Bill Blair Park, that was named for him, but it's right there where what used to be the central flooding area of that outlet of the Trinity River. And so when Bonton it would really flood, and it would go on over into the Pleasant Grove area. But at any rate, so some brilliant person with the city had the great idea that they would build these walls, and they looked like old ancient castle doors right there at a few inches up from H.S. Thompson at Bethlehem and Bear. That was just a foot, 3 or 4 feet up under 175. So you had 175, then you had these castle doors, like dungeon doors, that some brilliant person thought, we'll build these, and then if that flood threatens to come up out of Bontown, we'll just close those doors and let everybody drown. That was the imagery. Now, they did not promote it that way. They promoted it as preventing the flood from coming up their street. But what you gonna do with the people who live there, including my family, my grandmother, my neighbors? If you close those dungeon doors, we're all gonna drown. So they're still there. Those doors have never been used. Still right there at Bear Street and Bethera, under 175.
I remember when we got on the buses to go to my first NAACP convention. It was July of 1966. I would be 13 that September. And I remember just the joy and the pure excitement of being on a bus with a bunch of other Black people going to do something important. And we were imbued with that by Juanita Craft, by Mrs. Craft.
The National NAACP convention was held in Dallas in '54, and Miss Craft's youth group organized more youth chapters than any other chapter in the history of the NAACP.
She had been here 15 years by the time I got here. She was my port in a really stormy child. That's what she was. The woman who I came to live with was my mother's sister-in-law, and she knew Mrs. Craft. They had taken a millinery class together. They became friends. My aunt probably was not the ideal person to have two children. She never had any children of her own, and she was 48 when we came to live with her. I think that Mrs. Craft knew that she probably wasn't the best person to have these two children, and the fact that my aunt had brought us to her fresh off the plane, I think awakened something in Mrs. Craft. More so than other kids in the youth council, she took us under her wing. And she would always call my aunt and get me to come up there and help her clean up the house. I helped her can. She used to grow blackberries along her fence in the backyard. We'd pick the berries and can them and stuff. And she did that because she did need the help, but she was getting me away from an otherwise pretty much abusive environment. Her house is two houses. There's the big house and then the little house. And the little house, Warren Street, 2618 Warren. And so we had all of our meetings and stuff in the back and in the little house. And that's actually where Mrs. Craft lived. Her income was actually boarding out the front of the house. She had 3 rooms up there that she boarded. Mrs. Craft, and I've had conversations with other, what they call us now, Craft kids. She made us feel powerful, like we were really doing something. Remember 1960s and especially in Dallas, where people conspired to make us feel powerless. And she conspired to make us feel powerful. And we did. And that power emanated from her. And she made us feel like we were special because we were doing these things. Not to say that we were above or anything like that, but we were doing something special. We were advocating for equality and our rights and seriously working at it.
My mother, my sister and I joining the NAACP Youth Council. She would take us to the NAACP Council meeting. And that was really where my initial exposure to social justice or civil rights was established. And so at that time, I was 11 and my sister was 13 when we joined the NAACP Youth Council. So yes, it was 6. It's important to me, though, is to realize how that my mother wanted, meaning that I would not have gotten there. Otherwise, I would have never known the NAACP Youth Council, never known Mrs. Craft. But it's important that is, because oftentimes, right now, many times parents are not that involved. But we were motivated.
I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, and I've been in South Dallas here over 30 years.
Well, I'm Dallas, Texas. I was born in Florida, Texas, but I'm from Dallas, Texas. I've been over here in South Dallas for a good 20 years.
The name of the place is the Caribbean Connection Island House, but I started the Island House in 92. I'm a builder, so I build a lot of stuff. So anywhere I go, I could create and build.
It started out as a double address warehouse with nothing in it, completely gutted. And in this last 20 years, we have only had hot water for 2 years. No, maybe 3 years. Then we was washing our clothes out by hand, and we had extension cords running everywhere. Yeah. We started out with nothing, and when we built it,
we do everything to that place because we take it from nothing and bring it to where it is.
We're bringing the island
to the hood. And that is the story for the island.
We're bringing the island to the hood.
Yeah.
And
it's still island in the hood. It's Caribbean Connection, and it's a center that you come, you connect, so you get a better cultural experience.
We have the jambool, we have the steel drum, we have the house on wheels. We have
sewing, we do a variety. I set up to a variety. I cook and stuff too. So if you come there, we give a Caribbean food, barbecue, curry, whatever.
Even though we've been together for 20 years, I don't know what exactly is our energy, our color. I don't know. It's like people are scared to come. It's like we're too much for them. Together. We don't get it a whole lot, but we do get it when someone stops by and cannot believe what they're seeing. And the excitement, it's exciting to experience that.
But it's fun though. I'm trying to be happy with it.
I'm James Mitchell, graduated from Prairie View also, and was in management at Texas Instruments. I was a vice president, and I retired in the year 2000. And my friend Richard Watkins and I had this vision that we were going to do something in transforming South Dallas. And part of the strategy was to first do something in transforming the corner of Martin Luther King and Atlanta. That building where St. Martin's Place is happened to be available. I think we acquired it in 1997. It was actually built in 1906. And it was, Dr. Friedman was the builder, the initial owner. And after a couple of years, he sold it to the Toplitz family. And the Toplitz family they're in big time real estate in Dallas. And their reputation is really not stellar, and I'll get into that. And the old Toplitz estate, which is now St. Martin's Place, was dilapidated, and it had homeless people basically living in it. So we ended up buying St. Martin's Place, which is 2603 Martin Luther King. We ended up acquiring it from the Toplitz family. And really interesting because recently I got a call from the Toplitz family, and they want to buy it. And if they got enough money, they can have it. But what we really like to do is its legacy right now. Anyway, I ended up acquiring several other properties in the area, which was a part of the strategy. The old Forest Avenue Hospital, which was the only Black hospital in all of Texas and very few in the nation. It's located at 2516 Martin Luther King. It's still there. As a matter of fact, we sold it to a young lady, a doctor, and she is going to convert it to a clinic and a school. And we would often talk about how our black dollars don't get turned over in our community at all. As soon as we get a dollar, it leaves our community. That was part of this whole thing about the commitment to South Dallas. One of the most prideful moments in my life was having James, my son, graduating from Prairie View, and him running the business, having a business to run in South Dallas. As a part of that was the thing that I wanted my son to be able to have a business of his own, or that was ours.
That's a proud thing for me. As far as St. Martin's Place and the different projects that he's done as far as real estate, and just over the years, people know that my father's been involved in certain things, and that's most definitely a proud thing that you have a father that's basically has your best interests and has done things in the community and is trying to help you move forward.
My name is Bridget Daniel. I grew up in the South Dallas area and owned 2 businesses there. When Mom came here to South Dallas, moved here from Louisiana, Miss William used to do Mom's hair. She said, and at the time the beauty shop was called Grand Avenue Beauty Shop. A lot of people thought it was Mom's shop, but actually the lady that ran the shop was Miss Rowena Williams. And Daddy brought her up there saying he was looking for somebody to do his wife's hair. And so from there, that's how I met her. And I actually started working there in '94. And I worked there with her for 10 years. And I decided I want to branch out on my own. So after I stayed away 10 years, she got sick. And she called me up one day and she asked if I would come back to open those doors, because she said out of the 50 years she's been doing hair, those doors was never closed. So I closed my shop up, put my stuff in storage, came back up there. I did my clients, her clients, and her doctor told she couldn't come back to work. So she told me, do not leave. She said, this place has been good to me, and I know I'll do the same for you. That's how I became LaRue Creations, which is named after my mom. And I've been back ever since 2011. It was a complete circle. So for me to come back home and actually work and now own a salon where I grew up at, it was a blessing for me because it put me back in contact with the community.
You can ask some of my college friends. The entire time I was there, anybody who would listen, I would tell them, I'm getting my degree so I can go back and work and live in my neighborhood. It was important to me because at the time, and what I'm talking about when I'm having conversations with my cousin in high school, I don't know where these thoughts came from, but we would talk about how do you impact change in a challenging space and place, and it's by being present.
So now I can actually see what needs to be done with the community. We have a lot of mental illness. I think that's one of the things that we really need is a better tactic to help these with mental illness, because there are so many young black women that walks around nude, or they coming out of their clothes and they may just be topless, and people thinking it's drugs. It's not drugs. And these are people that I may feed every weekend of the month from my salon. So if we could get better mental illness help in this area.
Bothered me, and it bothers me now, to see Black Lives Matter written on the street next to where they say is an open air drug market. And it's 4 liquor stores in that corner. I just think it's something that we name these streets after such wonderful, powerful people, but we don't attach that to the community. That you drive down Martin Luther King, but what do you see that reflects Martin Luther King?
That's what I say, reading the accommodation and hearing about the bombings and things like that. It was real sobering because talk about where y'all lived, being born in 1950, and so living in South Dallas from 1950 on, and understanding like the violence that was perpetuated by white people and the black people just because they wanted to live in South Dallas, that was sobering. So to understand, like, it's been over 50, almost 70 years now, but black people living in there, moving there, in the divestment out of South Dallas, and people fighting it. So then just to get investment, there's Mama Diane Ragsdale and Miss Clark and all the people in the community that have been fighting. I just want to always thank my mom. I want to thank you for keeping us safe and giving us the opportunity to grow.
We're seeing a really positive swing in South Dallas, in the area where we focused, which is on Martin Luther King and in the historical area, South Boulevard and Park. There are things like fraternities and sororities, which I happen to be involved in the acquisition of properties for my fraternity, which is Kappa Alpha Psi, and convincing other sororities and fraternities to come to South Dallas and buy properties and clean them up. If you'll notice that the Central Forest Theater has been purchased, and we have high expectations for that building. So we're excited about things that are happening. Not really fast enough, but we had some significant improvement.
There is the stigma, I think, growing up in Dallas. You hear about South Dallas, and that's not the place you really want to hang out at late at night, things like that. And I guess, to be honest, there are parts of it that doesn't feel safe, especially by myself. I walk around, I do try to be careful, and I feel bad thinking about that, but then I know it's not anything to put on myself or my community. It's the history and how it was built here, and that's what I learned a lot with the accommodation and the places it was and where it's going. And so seeing the gentrification that is happening here, in a sense, can feel very exciting, because South Dallas should have a good functioning grocery store, and it should have money tripling in to make it a place where residents can live. But on top of that means that a lot of people who are living here probably can't afford, are going to get pushed out even further, because that seems like that's what it tends to happen, and what I've been seeing from the outside of it. I've learned to appreciate it and learn the characters of South Dallas and the struggles that it's going through. And again, I was able to erase a lot of that stigma that I grew up learning about the area.
The future of South Dallas is honestly like every red line community across the nation, not just in Dallas. I've been to many places, and across the nation, these types of areas, they call it urban development, but we know that that's a fancy name for takeover. Urban cowboys, they came and destroyed the Indians and took over. Now they're calling themselves urban developers.
I remember that when I came over here, I realized that I found my home. This is where I gained peace in my spirit and my soul. And I thought, I've been homeless before, and I traveled all over Dallas, but never came over here. God didn't bring me, He didn't let me come over here because He knew that I'd be home.
I just have to go back historically to the significance and the benefit, I guess, of South Dallas and that all-Black community, and how the community fed upon itself, nurtured itself, shared, helped, provided, educated, justly undergirded. Everything was right there. Social, faith, economic, education, housing, providing food, Black-owned businesses. Everything that the residents needed was right there. And so nurturing each other was the unwritten rule of life. There were no documents to say that, but it just was the way things were.